Okay, so this is the Bible study for Hosea chapter 4. And the title in my text, I read from the NIV. This title was not written by the original author, but inserted to help us in our studies by the translators. And the title says, The Charge Against Israel. A lot of times we don't necessarily read those titles and things like that. Um, but but I feel like it's helpful in this instance because the rest of Hosea, more or less, is sort of written in psalm or written in rhyme, not so much rhyme, but verse. I think verse is the best way to say it. And is specifically sort of uh, less narrative than we got in the first three chapters in terms of Hosea's actual life, and much more specifically, this is what God is saying to Israel. So that's enough commentary for now. Chapter 4, verse 1 says, Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. There's no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There's only cursing, lying, murder, stealing, adultery. They break all bonds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Because of this, the land dries up, and all who live in it waste away. The beasts of the field, the birds in the sky, and the fish in the sea are swept away. But let no one bring a charge. Let no one accuse one another. For you people are like those who bring charges against a priest. You stumble day and night, and the prophets stumble with you. So I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. But you have rejected knowledge. I also reject you as my priests, because you have ignored the law of your God. I also ignore your children. The more priests there were, the more they sinned against me. They exchanged their glorious God for something disgraceful. They feed on the sins of my people and relish in their wickedness. And it will be like people like priests. I will punish both of them in their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat, but not have enough. They will engage in prostitution, but not flourish, because they have deserted the Lord to give themselves to prostitution. Old wine and new wine take away their understanding. My people consult a wooden idol, and a diviner's rod speaks to them. A spirit of prostitution leads them astray. They are unfaithful to their God. They sacrifice on the mountaintops and burn offerings on the hills, under oak, poplar, and terebinth, where the shade is pleasant. Therefore, your daughters turn to prostitution, and your daughters-in-law to adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they turn to prostitution, nor your daughters-in-law when they commit adultery, because the men themselves consort with harlots and sacrifice with shrine prostitutes. The people without understanding will come to ruin. Though you, Israel, commit adultery, do not let Judah become guilty. Do not go to Gilgal. Do not go up to Bethaven. And do not swear as surely as the Lord lives. The Israelites are stubborn, like a stubborn heifer. How then can the Lord pasture them like lambs in a meadow? Ephraim is joined to idols. Leave him alone. Even when their drinks are gone, they continue their prostitution. Their rulers dearly love shameful ways. A whirlwind will sweep them away, and their sacrifices will bring them shame. So this kind of continues on. The chapters ahead are in verse much like this, but it's kind of hard to divide it up, but we have to find some way to divide it up. I was looking into chapter 5 and realized this theme with the thoughts about Judah has a tendency to continue, and I thought, well, we could continue on in this Bible study with that text, but I have a full page of questions and thoughts, and I didn't know how I was going to fit the rest of it in. So we're going to stop there and try to divide this appropriately for our benefit and how we can understand it and study it. So remember that you could download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And then you can follow along with us as we ask questions about the text. Number one, what has happened so far in the book of Hosea? It feels like these first three chapters have served to set us up for what's going to be said to Israel in the rest of the book of Hosea. So it's important. A, God called Hosea to marry a promiscuous woman. Indeed, that's true. B, Hosea felt the pain of unfaithfulness and spoke boldly against it, both to his wife and to Israel. That is true. C, God called Hosea to bring his wife back, and he went to buy her back. That is true. And D, Hosea told her that she must no longer be unfaithful and chase after these other men. And that is true. And so those are the chapters that are largely not in verse, and it's almost like that's the narrative that sets up how we got to this point and what God is saying in this section. So it's helpful to understand that. If everybody's been with us in our Bible studies, I shouldn't need to talk for a long time about that. If you have not been with us, then go back and watch the videos for the other Bible studies. If you are teaching this and you have people come for the first time that have not been with us these first three chapters, you can spend a little time catching up. But I don't feel like I need to catch you up. If you're a teacher, you've probably been watching all along here. So number 2 says, what is happening now in chapter 4? A, well, according to the title above the chapter in my Bible, Israel is being read their charges. So I already shared that when I was reading the text. It's sort of, he's speaking out loud the charges against them. This is what you've done. We haven't got yet to the resolution or what should change. Sometimes we like to balance our texts in our Bible study to have that hope at the end or that moment. Be with us throughout this Bible study series, and you will, I promise, you will get to moments of hope, and this is what we're to do. This text certainly is primarily the charges against Israel. B, this is specifically the word of the Lord and specifically directed at Israel. I know that there was some moments of almost sounded like ranting by Hosea about his wife and talking to his kids about their mother. In some of the chapters, this specifically says at the beginning, hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you. So now that Hosea has been taken through this process of understanding the heart of God, now he speaks out loud, specifically the word of God. Number 3 says, what charge? So this is a charge. This is the charges. What charge does God bring against Israel in 4:1 and 3? A, there is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God, and so we could speak specifically about each of those. Faithfulness involves remaining faithful, responding to the call, to your own commitment, to your own bond of relationship. No faithfulness often comes from no love. So a lot of people that try to go through obedience, but there's no love, resent their master, if you will. So when we think in terms of marriages, and then there's been a lot of, well, who's in charge in the marriage? And, a lot of people get upset if a pastor says something like the Bible talks about the man being head of his wife or something like that. One of the things we always do in Paul's letters when we study those is talking about at the moment right after God says to a wives submit to your husband, God says, husbands, love your wives. And if there's love, then faithfulness is not so hard. If there's love, obedience is not so hard. And one of the problems I think a lot of people have with religion, with Christianity, with God, is that they don't first find love for God. Therefore, their obedience to God is out of duty and not out of love, and therefore they resent God's commands. And if that lasts at all, it doesn't last very long. There's no acknowledgement of God. So they get to the place where they just ignore God altogether, which is what is happening in Israel. B, there is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery. And that is so. One of the things that I can't help but say is Israel was supposed to be the people of God. Israel was supposed to be a people who were God's people, devoted to God, and this is what became of them. This is what happened in Israel. I would say that America was founded supposedly as one nation under God. Um, America was supposedly founded, people wanted religious freedom and were not being allowed to practice worship of God in the places where they were being persecuted. So they came to America to have the freedom to worship God. And so now what we have, this does not sound whenever somebody is complaining about what's going on in Albuquerque, this is what it sounds like. There's only cursing, lying, murder, stealing, adultery. This describes our city. This describes our country. Um, and and we need to sort of take note that this is the charge being brought, and then consider what part we as people of God play in that, which I think is going to be brought out here in a little bit, lest we start criticizing the country around us or the city around us. C, they break all bonds, bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. That feels like that's true. D, the land is barren and everything is dying because of their behavior. Um, Sin is everywhere. I want to be clear on that. Sin is everywhere in the city of Albuquerque. Sin is everywhere in the country, in the world. But um, I will admit that a semblance of uh, Christianity seems to be more prominent in some areas of town than others. And when I think about bounds being broken and bloodshed follows bloodshed, and there's only cursing, lying, murder, stealing, and adultery, I certainly, what comes to mind is the war zone. Obviously, where our one of our locations is ABQ Central, and when I look around at ABQ Central in that area in the war zone, one of the things that I noticed a few years back, they tried to redo the median. They planted trees in the median and stuff like that. They planted trees when they built the UNM clinic. I was looking the other day at the tree in front of the bus stop there, and somebody's ripped off a port. I don't know if it was because a car went through it, going through the bus stop. Maybe one of the cars that went through our fence, or if it's because people just rip things off because they have no respect for property. I don't know. But when I look around, when they planted those trees, I chuckled to myself because I thought, we planted trees in front of our building too. Um, the trees that we planted only lasted so many urines. Um, the P is on it, and they were evergreens, and you could see the whole side of the bush turned yellow, um uh in like dead dried yellow. um and that everything dies. One of the reasons that I love coming into the parking lot now that we've changed the fence, and with the stuff that Pastor James is doing with the garden, and is that it feels like an oasis, because you come in and there's plants growing, and you look in and there's trees that are surviving and thriving, there's children playing, and there's a garden, and it feels like this oasis where something lives in the midst of all the death. Because you go up and down the streets, and it's not just that there's homeless encampments, it's that the people living so selfishly, only caring about what what high they can get right now or whatever, destroy everything in their path. Anything good that was planted or put up is destroyed by selfish living people. And we can see that in the war zone versus when we go to other parts of town. And I don't get me wrong, there's sin in the other parts of town too. It's just not so blatant and obvious. And there are still at least a few bounds, it seems, that sort of hold us in or hold us back from just outright selfishness in other places. But I look at the war zone and I see destruction because of selfish living, and that's what Hosea is describing. So when he talks about the death, the land dries up, all who live in it waste away. We cut off our nose to spite our face. A homeless person that destroys a tree for whatever is going on right now doesn't have shade tomorrow, and is lying out in the hot sun getting sunburnt and heat stroke. And that's what we do when we get outright selfish in our sin. And that's what he's describing in Israel. And you're living this way. It's hurting the people around you. It's hurting you. It's hurting the land. It's this way that you're living. This is what it does. It brings destruction on everything. Number 4, it says, what does God say in 4, 4, and 5? But let no one bring a charge, let no one accuse another. I love this because, when I say this about you as a nation, don't point your finger at each other. So our tendency is, let's be careful. Our tendency is, when we hear the charge against Israel, when we hear the charge against America, when we hear the charge against Albuquerque, to point our finger at the homeless, to point our finger at the president, to point our finger at whoever else is doing, we blame for this. Why isn't the mayor doing something? What about the police? This is who is really the problem. He says, your people are like those who bring charges against a priest. Now, in our modern day, I just feel like I need to make this disclaimer. Sometimes there are charges that should be brought against a priest because a priest has done wrong. We'll get to that in the coming text. We'll get to that in the coming question. But let's first consider what a priest is supposed to be, and take this metaphor, what he's trying to say, before we consider that the priests also have gone off course. What he's saying is, you're pointing at the finger at the person that you think is worse than you, but the reality is that's like somebody pointing a finger at the priest. The priest is, even if he's gone off course, he's more holy than the people. Is what it should be. And the people are accusing the priest. So it's the one who is supposed to be holy being accused by the people that aren't even close. And I believe that's what he goes on and talks about. The prophets stumble, and it goes on and talks about the priests also being punished. So I don't want to go too far down this, but I believe the metaphor that he's using here is specifically trying to point out that you pointing at the finger at the person next to you is usually the unholy person pointing the finger at the person that's more holy, and refusing to receive that message on yourself, because you think you are the one that's more holy. Um, and so that's the problem we get, is when we start talking about this and this charge being brought against us as a people, we almost always think the guy next to us is the problem. And when you think that, the chances are you're bringing the accusation against the person that's not the problem near as much as you are. Um, so that's where we need to stop and hear this as directed at us, not as directed at the person next to us. See, says something about your mother. It always has to be the mother that comes up. He says, I will destroy your mother. Um, so this is possibly a reference back to, Hosea's, what he was talking about in chapter 2, talking about speak to your mother. It is possible that this gives us an understanding of sort of a metaphor where Israel is the mother. But yeah, there's nothing really deep about this that I can see. Just the destruction will come on the nation. The destruction will come on the one who's been unfaithful. Number 5, what does God say to Israel in 4:6-9? He says, my people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. The destruction is coming from lack of knowledge. They have rejected knowledge. What does that mean? So this is not ignorance. Okay, they had lack of knowledge, so they're going to be destroyed. God, traditionally, what we see about God is God doesn't destroy those who are ignorant. He destroys those who know better and did that anyway. So then to hear they have rejected knowledge. So you can't claim ignorance if the truth is brought to you and you have rejected it. So yes, you are ignorant, you don't have knowledge, but it's because you chose to be ignorant, because you refused, you rejected knowledge. When truth was brought to you, you didn't want anything to do with it. So you can't claim innocence because of ignorance, because you rejected knowledge. So what's that mean? They have lack of knowledge. The knowledge is the truth of God, and they rejected the truth of God. They had the opportunity to be who God had created them and called them to be, but they rejected that when they were corrected, and therefore they are something else. They've chosen to be something else. B, he says he rejects them as priests. Is that talking about priests specifically? See also Isaiah 61, Exodus 19:6, 1 Peter 2:0 is not correct at all. Hold on, let me get the right reference to that. 2:9 is the correct reference, 2:9, and Revelation 1:6. And all of this is reference to God calling his people a kingdom of priests. So in Isaiah and Exodus, this is an Old Testament concept that was then repeated in the New Testament by Peter and John, that you are a kingdom of priests. So the people of God are all priests, are all supposed to represent God. Israel was supposed to represent God to the people around them, but they did not. They were not representing God. Therefore, he rejected them as priests. They can't be the ones that bring the word of God to the people and bring the people closer to God if they are not close to God, if they do not represent God. And so he's saying he represents them as priests. Now, again, Maybe we could talk about he speaks specifically about the priests, but in this section he's talking to all of Israel, and he says, I have rejected you as priests. And so I don't believe he's just talking about the priests, although I do believe that he does then transition to talk about that. So C says, it does appear that prophets, priests, and people have all stumbled together, and there is no one to speak the word of truth to the people and correct them except Hosea, apparently. They are all going to be punished together. So it says it will be like people like priests. So he's going to punish the priests alongside the people because the priests are not bringing correction. The the prophets stumble with the people, and so they're not speaking the truth of God to the people. Um, so we have this sort of evolution in this verse of the evolution of what he's saying about priests and how he's using that term to speak to the people. I feel like number 6 says, "What is God saying in 4:10 through 14?" Everyone is trying to live their own way, get what they want, however they can get it, but it is not. It says it is going to work. It is not going to work. It is not going to work. Um, Boy, if somebody didn't watch this Bible study and was trying to teach this without watching the lay pastors, boy, they would have a real trouble because of my typos, wouldn't they? Well, I could just go correct it, or I could just figure out who doesn't watch this. It's a cool face. It's not going to work. So they are they're going after idols. They're turning to prostitution. It says, but they don't flourish. Um, they try to do this as a money-making strategy. They're trying to go and get what they need, but whatever they're trying is not working because they're not following God. They're not doing it the way God called them to do. So we may not turn to prostitution in the clearest sense of the term, in the least metaphorical sense of the term, but when we turn to our own ways and say, "Oh, God didn't give me this. I earned this with my job, with my hands, with my brain, with I got this paycheck. Why should I tithe? God didn't give this to me. I need this to provide for myself." Then we're looking to our own strength to provide for ourselves. And that's becoming our idol, our God. That's becoming how we think we can provide for ourselves, and instead of looking to God. And these other things cannot help. He's saying that I will frustrate them. You're not going to get what you need trying it that way. The only way you're going to have what you need is by turning to me, to God. See, God says he won't punish the girls who are turning to prostitution because the men are leading the way. He says, I'm not going to punish your daughters for being prostitutes, your daughters-in-law for being adulterers. Um, so that would have been the way it was, right? It was a very male-centric culture, if a father found out his daughter-in-law was unfaithful to his son, he might lead the way in the punishment. But God says, I'm not going to punish that because you guys are turning to the harlots. You're turning to the temple prostitutes. You guys are doing it. It takes two to tango. Okay, so you're going after it. Well, this is another instance where somebody's pointing the finger at somebody else. Why would I punish them? I need to punish all of you, yes, but I'm going to start with you, not with them that you're pointing the finger at. This is probably helpful in our world with our new enlightened thinking about women and their place in society. That they should not be the main ones punished. I will say that I don't think that was always the case anyway. The adulterer, the male, was also punished But it does seem like in the male-centric society that women were punished, maybe inordinately. In this case, I think we'll like this because he's pointing out that the men were just as much the problem. Number 7, what is God saying in 4:15 through 19? This closes the text for today. He seems to make the distinction not now between Israel and Judah, the two kingdoms. So he says, though you, Israel, commit adultery, do not let Judah become guilty. B, he is warning Judah not to follow in the ways of Israel. Now in verse 17, and in, I think I saw it a couple of times here, he uses the term Ephraim. Ephraim is often used interchangeably with Israel. The two kingdoms were called Judah and Israel commonly. Ephraim. So Israel was the combined kingdom was Israel. Israel had 12 sons. There were 12 tribes of Israel. When the kingdom separated, I believe it was 2 tribes and 10 tribes. Judah and I believe Benjamin were the two that were in the smaller kingdom of Judah, smaller at least in terms of number of tribes. And the 10 tribes were in what continue to be called Israel, sometimes is called Ephraim, for the same reason that the 2 tribes were called Judah, because of one of the tribes within it. So Ephraim and Israel are often used interchangeably. Sometimes when they're talking about Judah, you'll hear Benjamin mentioned, and I believe that's mentioned in the next chapter as we talk about Judah as well. And he is warning Judah not to follow in the ways. So Ephraim, it's kind of like looking at 2 sons and saying, well, your brother's gone off track. You don't follow him. And that's what it seems like God is saying through Hosea. Now, historically, I believe Hosea primarily spoke to the kingdom of Israel and not to Judah. But in this case, he's issuing a warning. Israel has gone off track. Don't follow. In many cases, I'm thinking about in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the kingdoms both were punished and both went off track, were carried into exile at different times by different people. But God sent prophets individually to each kingdom usually. Number 8 says, how should we consider this warning? So God is warning us. God is speaking to us. We see that this prophecy applies to us. Us as Americans, us as humans, us as, it's the term pequeños, as people from Albuquerque, people from New Mexico, though we don't want to point the finger at others, but let's take the warning upon ourselves not to be this, not to be like our brothers, not to be like the ones that have gone astray, and heed this warning that God gives us.